of time and space. Everywhere and anywhere, every star that ever was. Where do you want to start?
We've escaped from Nero, and we've travelled far-o to the mysterious planet of Vortis. I wonder what's out there. I'm Iain.
And I'm Mark, and welcome to All of Time and Space. This time out, we're going to be taking a look at the Web Planet. So let's get up to speed with where we are in the story. Doctor Who lands his space-time machine TARDIS on the cold, craggy planet of Vortis. The Doctor and his companions, Ian and Vicky, are soon captured by the Zarbi, huge ant-like creatures with metallic bodies and pincer claws. Meanwhile, Barbara falls into the hands of the friendly Menoptera, who have come to rid Vortis of the malevolent power of the Zarbi. And we'll be back with our friend Lindsey after this.
What's happening, Doctor? What's happening? We seem to be caught. Trapped somehow. This is some strange phenomenon. There's no power in the ship. It's useless.
Ian, Doctor, look. I saw a flash behind one of those crags.
Where?
Out there. I saw it. I saw it.
Well, it's not there now.
Well, I can see it's not then.
All right. Don't snap at each other, my dear.
I'm sorry.
You probably saw some cosmic ray which is causing the interference.
Well, I was almost... Vicky? The noise. It stopped. Yes. It's all gone now. Come on. I think you better lie down for a while.
It's so disturbing, all this. Well, Doctor? I understand. Well, there's nothing for it, my boy, but we shall... it's a matter of exploration. We shall have to go and find the trouble of this interference and then learn how to counteract it.
And welcome back. And I'm really pleased to say we've been joined by a friend of the show. It's our dear friend Lindsey.
Hey. Hello. Thank you for having me back.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
It's wonderful to have you back.
Oh, 6.
I'm so sorry that it's for this particular story, but you know. But before we get into the gist of what we've dragged you on to talk about, Ian.
Yes, Lindsey, it is time for you to face the Mind Probe.
Oh no, not the Mind Probe.
Not the Mind Probe.
That is a legendary delivery.
That's fantastic. That's my favourite one so far. That's what's known as the Jericho opening, if you're a fan of the game. Let us talk about the Mind Probe. Lindsey, if you get the questions right, you will be returned to your customary time and place. But if you fail the Mind Probe, Castellan Cockram here will toss you into the Time Lash.
That sounds like somewhere I probably don't want to be.
You're not wrong. So we have 4 simple questions for you. Tonight, obviously, we are gathered here, and again, I'm also very sorry, we are gathered here to talk about the Web Planet. So there is a Web Planet theme in some small way to some of these questions. If you're ready, we will begin.
I am indeed ready.
Question 1. What is Cliff Richards' real name?
I have no idea. Barry White.
That's close. It's actually Harry Webb.
Oh, is there going to be a theme here? Should I have known that?
You can kind of very much see the direction we're going in as we move into question 2. Which celebrated children's novel about Wilbur the pig was
Charlotte's
written by
Web.
E.B. White? It is Charlotte's Web. Fantastic.
Wow, straight in there.
Question 3. Name another Doctor Who story that has the word web in the title.
The Web of Fear?
That is perfectly wonderful.
Ooh, get in.
And finally, question 4. Martin Jarvis, yes or no?
Yes?
I'm afraid the answer is a big fat no.
Oh, apologies.
On the whole, I would say 2 out of 4. That's a good enough pass mark, not only for
I'd say that's a
Gavin
pass,
Williamson,
yeah.
but for me as well. So you have passed. You have defeated the Mind Probe. Well done.
Hey, thank you.
Well done, Lindsay. Congratulations.
What can I say? I've rehearsed and practiced long and hard.
Well, we can't put it off any longer. We're going to have to talk about the web planet.
Yeah.
Mark.
Hello.
Do you want to hear a joke?
With some feeling of dread, yes.
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Vortis.
Vortis who?
What is your opinion of this Doctor Who story?
Oh, that's a dad joke.
It really is.
That's a real dad joke. Yeah.
So before we begin, I feel like I should make 2 admissions.
Right.
So the first one is that this recording was arranged on relatively short notice.
Yeah, sorry.
No, not at all. So I have only watched the serial once. And the second admission is...
I think you'll find once
Well,
is
the
enough.
second admission is that I might have struggled a little to stay connected with what was happening on the screen. So I'm afraid that a lot of my chat may revolve around butterfly people and giant ants.
Okay, that's fine. Can I just say, if after this whole ordeal, for some bizarre reason, you would like to come back again and talk about another story, we will try and get you in for something that you might enjoy a bit more.
Well, you know what? I think... So I mentioned when we were recording the last episode of Check This Out, which is a podcast I do with a variety of other Whovians, although it is about Star Trek.
Yes.
And I mentioned that this was the episode we were doing, and afterwards I got a message from the lovely Suki going, yeah, you're going to need a lot of coffee.
Harsh but
yeah,
fair.
I think so. So the last episode that I covered with you guys was the Aztecs?
There's the Aztecs, yes, that's right.
So I am not particularly well versed in classic Who, so I haven't seen a lot of this kind of era. But this was really different from that, and actually, as much as we're joking about...
Oh baby, was it different.
about some of the challenges, actually, there were some things that are really commendable about it. So I will have some positive things to say.
Yeah, I'm not going to be totally negative about this, because I just feel there's a great deal of ambition, albeit not necessarily always fulfilled. But I think it's really trying really hard on a very small BBC budget to do something different.
Absolutely. And it's probably it's certainly the oldest or the earliest proper sci-fi Doctor Who that I've ever seen. And I think there is something really remarkable in the effort, the costuming and the acting has gone to create quite distinct species. And so I think there's a lot of kudos to be had there. Less so for the Vaseline on the lens.
Yeah, they're trying to make it otherworldly, and they did several things in order to try and help that illusion of an alien planet. So as you mentioned, they did like to slap a bit of Vaseline over the lens just to sort of make it look a bit weird and blurry, which I'm sure on a tiny little 1960s TV screen would have been perfectly fine. There was something that cropped up because I have all the DVDs. They have this thing called info text where you can just stick it on. It's like a subtitle track, and it will come popping up with bits of trivia that you may or may not know about the story. And apparently there were a team of people dispatched to Cornwall to collect a load of seaweed in order to have that put all across the studio floor to make it appear more otherworldly. Now, there were two problems.
I can already see
that.
where this is going.
The first one, I was pretty sure I knew what the problem was going to be. In the 1960s, with these old style black and white cameras, they needed the studio lights to be super bright, and that meant they ran super hot. So, as you can imagine, the stench coming from all of this seaweed as it dried out and effectively cooked on the studio floor was horrific. The other thing, which I must admit I didn't see coming, if you'll pardon the pun, you'll understand what I mean in a minute. They're saying up in the little section where all the production teams sit and they watch
the control gallery.
The control gallery, yes, thank you, Ian. They're saying, we're getting all this really weird glare on the cameras and it's making it really difficult to try and get a decent shot. Can you just go down and have a look? And when they investigated, the seaweed was absolutely chocker with used condoms.
Wow. In the 60s?
In the 60s.
Wow.
Maybe that's why William Hartnell was looking so chipper in this episode.
Now, is chipper the word we're going to use? Because I felt he had an air of somebody with kind of... I'm trying to find the right way to approach this, because I genuinely don't want to be offensive to anyone, but certainly at the start of this, it felt very much like he was a dementia patient, that he was being looked after by a collection of carers who may or may not have been suitable for the job.
Well, first of all, let's look at it from the perspective of William Hartnell, right? You are William Hartnell. Shag, marry, avoid. The Menoptera, the Optera, or the Zarbi.
Okay, so the Menoptera are the butterfly people, yes? The Zarbi are the giant ants.
Yep.
And who... There were two different kind of other minion people. What was the...
Well, there was the sort of woodlice folk who I think were called the Optera.
Ah, okay.
Oh no, that's no, they're the
really?
No, the Optera are the little sort of grub guys.
The ones
the guy
who
that talks
speak
like
this,
that guy, yeah.
Oh.
Hello there.
So there was like the cockroach people, the woodlice people, the butterfly people, and the giant ants.
Yeah, the woodlice are called larvae guns.
Which I have questions about, because if they're larvae, do they then become ant people?
Who
if they
flipping
do, then
knows?
if they're still on the planet when the ant people are like... it's all very complicated. Yes, overambitious might be the word that comes to mind.
So, Mark, let me
Yeah.
just ask you quickly, just to circle back. Obviously, I think I'm right in saying that both Lindsey and I have enjoyed this story very much in the last couple of days, probably. You may have seen this before, I'm guessing?
Yes, this would have been on the old UK Gold Sky Channel back in the 90s.
Right.
I wasn't one for really collecting the VHS tapes. That's probably... I'm going to get lots of hate mail now. I had Revenge of the Cybermen given to me as a birthday present, which I loved to bits. And I only really bought a couple of other releases of the sort of pre-recorded ones.
Yeah.
I think primarily because they were a tad expensive.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was my first exposure to it. And then I got the DVD when that came out. Paid full price for it as well, because, you know, obviously it's a classic. Not so much in your opinion?
Let's keep our powder dry there, eh?
Oh, we should ask Lindsey. Since last time, there's been a change to the lineup
So
of
there
the TARDIS
has.
crew. So now Susan has gone, and we now have Vicky. I just wonder what your thoughts
So
were
the
about
first thing
Vicky.
to say is probably that it took me a few scenes to try and decide whether that was or was not Susan. So my understanding...
And why they'd started calling
Well,
her Vicky as well. That's really
true
weird.
fact.
But yeah.
Yeah, so I did a little research. So my understanding is that Vicky is from the future. So she's human, but from the future, but dressed like she's from the 60s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because she's very Twiggy-esque, really, isn't she? I feel, and this may just be because I haven't had proper sight of her, it feels very much like they've swapped one irritating young woman for another. Like,
Ooh.
she's young and she screams and
my
she
goodness.
does things she shouldn't do.
Hmm.
And
So maybe this story isn't perhaps
quite
serving
possibly.
her particularly well, but I think I can speak for Ian, and I can say that we're both big fans of Vicky.
Absolutely. I don't remember. She might have screamed once or twice, but I think when you're confronted by a sort of 6-foot insect, you're allowed to. In all the other stories with her that we've seen, she's actually been, fantastic, and such a marked departure from the character of Susan. She's been a breath of fresh air.
I'm excited then.
In sort of Twiggy-esque shape.
I am very aware of the fact that I've only had like a very small kind of insight into her character.
It's hard for you because you're just seeing a snapshot of her rather than seeing the continuity from
Absolutely.
one
And I
story
think
to the next.
I will admit to have been really frustrated quite early on. It was either in episode 1 or 2, I think, when there's some discussion of getting her a sedative, and then they give her aspirin, and that really irritates me. Because that's the kind of thing I care about. Anybody who's ever heard me on Track This Out knows that I get slightly obsessed about like medical quirkiness and good old sort of old-fashioned angst. And I just like, don't say things like that. Say like, I'm gonna get her a painkiller, and then give her like it just. Yeah. Anyway, it's a small hill that I will often die on.
So out of all the things that you can find to pick fault with, that is your major gripe.
You've said, I will not have inaccurate medical nomenclature.
No, it's been nonsense.
She's lucky she didn't just get a handful of seaweed with some old rubber johnnies in it, because that was clearly what everybody else was having.
Well, you know what? It's interesting though, because like that kind of thing there isn't an excuse for. Like it's just an error. Like it's fine. It's not the end of the world, but it is an error. Whereas, like, we can all acknowledge that, the costuming is clearly costuming. But actually, there's clearly been a lot of effort put into those costumes. And the people inside them are clearly trying really hard to create a distinct character. So, like, I'm quite happy to overlook, the fact that occasionally the backdrop got knocked and you could tell it was, like, a sheet as opposed to a wall. Like, those kind of things I will happily forgive.
And the camera bumps into one of the Zarbi at one point, and...
Yeah, and, like, the fighting is awful.
Yeah, I'm just remembering the bit where sort of they're all fighting a Zarbi near the end, and so Barbara sort of runs at it a bit, and then the Zarbi runs away, and then Barbara runs over here, and then the Zarbi runs after her, realises it hasn't got any arms to do anything to her, so it sort of runs back off again. And you just think, was this coordinated, or was this them in the playground after school?
In fairness, can you imagine what it must have been like inside one of those ant costumes in the boiling heat of that studio? And apparently they weighed a ton as well.
Well, they would have been fiberglass, wouldn't they? So that that would be very heavy. You're bent over, so it's going to be killing your back. You've got that bloody noise every time you speak as a Zarbi. That got mildly grating, let's be honest. So, yes, every bit as much as the Monoptera were working really hard to create a sort of butterfly, or I'm going to come back to this because I thought they were wasps, that sort of life form, then the guys in the Zarbi costumes were also working, 3 times harder than anyone else.
And I think I would say that the Monoptera did appear to be like in giant fur suits as well. So yes, they were kind of like and at one point they were so obsessed with the light that I was like, are you supposed to be moths? It's kind of hard to tell in black and white. It's like, are you moths or are you butterflies or are you giant bumblebees with strangely shaped wings?
Well, let's have the conversation. What? So you think they were butterfly people?
I think so.
Okay, I looking at their wings, I'm going to say that I thought they were wasps. Mark, casting vote, what insect would you go for?
I'd say some sort of butterfly wasp hybrid.
Oh, very nice. Sitting on the fence with you. Your butterfly vespiform.
Here is one of those interesting things. I feel like if Monoptera might be like a mangling of something, I wonder if we actually investigated, we could tell what they were supposed to be.
I mean, that would involve some sort of research and preparation, which is very much against what Iain and I.
It flies in the face of the code of the truth of the beauty.
It really does.
Interestingly, so again, as somebody who isn't particularly familiar with classic Who, Menoptera felt very familiar. So I don't know if they get a reference somewhere else or.
They do make a little cameo in the Mark Gatiss docudrama.
Oh, I have definitely seen that.
They did for the 50th anniversary, An Adventure in Space of Time. But I don't think they make another appearance in,
I feel like
in the show proper.
They're just waiting to be reintroduced. I feel like you could do some interesting things these days.
With modern day effects, I think it could be done in a quite a satisfactory way. Bless them, they did what they could. This was another story that they gave to Richard Martin to direct. And he does get a lot of stick from Who fans. But I think he's trying his best with what is a fairly difficult story to try and realise.
Well, the pacing
on a
was
BBC
pretty
budget.
rubbish. And again, how much of this is due to the challenges of only really being able to do one take or two takes, and people may perhaps not remembering their lines as coherently as they might do. But like certainly again at the start, there was a lot of like weighty pauses where it felt like one of them was waiting for somebody else to speak. And then, bless him, Iain would ask a question, or he'd be like, but what about this thing? And then all of a sudden, the Doctor would be talking about, which maybe is why it felt a little bit like a carer, dementia patient kind of dynamic to me.
In fairness, I think as time goes on, William Hartnell's illness is starting to affect his memory quite a lot, and I think on numerous occasions his co-stars would have to sort of jump in and try and ad-lib their way back into the script as it was if he was drying up. So,
and it must have been.
Yeah, it must have been quite tricky.
Absolutely. And for all that I will say awful things about this era, I'm very aware that for some people this is incredibly important. Like this is the Doctor Who that they were introduced to, and everything else that follows comes from this. This is not my favourite iteration of the Doctor. But that's okay.
Yeah, I feel bad because I feel like you haven't really seen a good representation of how fun he can be, because he can be an absolute hoot. But unfortunately,
well, it was a bit of Lothario in the last one.
Yeah, not perhaps the best served. I think there are some neat ideas in terms of the story and I think they call it what's it they call it again? So it's the animus, but they refer to it as a carcinome.
Yes.
So they've got this being that's invaded this planet, and it's effectively killing the planet as a sort of a metaphor for cancer and things like that. And it's that's quite high concept. And some of the ideas that they're trying to put together are quite interesting, but unfortunately they're limited by what they can do.
Well, I did
visually.
I did want to sort of just quickly see if I've got my head around the plot. So, if I'm right, a giant sort of sexy-voiced spider thing has made giant ants the dominant race on Vortis, driving away the giant wasp people, who have now returned to the planet for a giant insect war.
Yeah.
Now, that sounds like the sort of thing Carl Pilkington would have made up.
Oh, yeah.
You know, just giant insects. Now, obviously, this is, I think, pretty much the only example, certainly that I've ever seen, of a sort of battle between two different sets of aliens. And every other time in Doctor Who, you might get one alien race, but they will be in opposition to some humans. And people have always said, why don't we see more inter-alien wars? And I think there is a kind of post hoc ergo propter hoc kind of, they tried it once in the Web Planet. A lot of people thought it didn't quite come off as might have been planned. And it's kind of shaped, as we're seeing quite a lot watching these stories through in order. It's another kind of step on the path, isn't it? It's kind of, Doctor Who is becoming the show we now know it as, because it's trying everything else, and those doors are very firmly but politely closing until you end up, you know, with a much more...
So they're finding their way
Yeah.
and finding that the path to what becomes Doctor Who. Yeah, it's still quite embryonic,
it's interesting because
even at this
there are a
stage.
myriad of ways in which this story fails, and like it does. But the concepts were good, and I don't think it is either the costuming or the special effects that really stop it. Because like I'm happy to put those aside. Now, in some ways, it may be the format. Because they have to try and do, you know, these 25-minute episodes or whatever that all have something akin to a cliffhanger at the end of them. But yeah, I think the pacing and the scripting is as much at fault here as anything.
So, Lindsay, which episode would you say that you fell asleep
So I think I struggled to kind of invest from episode 1. So I took some advice and I did not try and sit down and watch it all at once. I watched episodes 1 and 2, and then I watched episodes 3 and 4, and then I watched episodes 4 and 5. I can't count to 6 apparently.
Mark, do you want to step in and help out here? Do the info text, Mark. Mention there are 6 episodes.
Yes, and I watched them in 2, so it's
There
1
are
and 2,
6
3 and 4,
episodes,
5 and 6. There we go. It's been a long day apparently.
Right.
Yeah, so I struggled to buy in at the start because some of the nonsense they were spouting about power didn't make sense. They contradicted themselves, and that frustrated me. And there was the thing with the aspirin. So I think it took too long to get going, and then...
And you were already offside when it finally did get going.
Yeah, I'm just not sure. Like, I don't know that it...
And then it ended.
I struggled at some points to try and keep track of where the different people were with the different groups of insects. And like, I totally understood that, you know, the butterfly/wasp people had lived there and had to go away and were now trying to come back, and that the ants were the bad guys, and that there was something going on behind the ants. Like, I got all of the basic plot elements. I just struggled to kind of... And part of that was that I wasn't paying enough attention.
Okay.
Like, yeah. So I don't know. Maybe it was me as much as anything, and that's often the case with these things. But there were some beautiful little touches, like the crystalline communicator thing that they used. I thought that was a beautiful piece of design because like it moved and you heard it move and it felt solid and real, and that was great. So like things like that were amazing.
Yeah.
But just. Yeah, I don't know. It all felt really very slow. Like the gold thing, like, oh, Barbara's gold bracelet is like pulling her arm around the TARDIS.
Oh, yeah, I remember that now. I'd blanked that bit out, but it reminded me of...
You do have to feel for her when she reads
like,
that description. Christ on a bike.
Ian's gold pen disappearing, and I was too busy thinking, right, why is he carrying around a gold pen and using a tie to keep his trousers up? Now, I suspect the tie to keep his trousers up might be a plot thing from another episode, but...
I don't know.
This is because Ian's a player.
So there's not a reason why he uses an old school tie.
He likes to swan around. He likes to swan around with a gold pen in his pocket just to show the ladies just how cool he is.
Yeah. Next time he's on, Vortis and he's got to write a check in front of some hot chicks, he can slap out.
So what about the belt? Has he lost his belt somewhere?
Do we know about the belt? Is there a backstory for the belt? Has anyone shipped the belt?
I don't remember the belt.
No, I don't think it's. I don't think it's come up before. I guess at some point he might.
Maybe
have
there's a missing mini-sode.
Yeah, no, maybe that's what it is, or maybe there's an annual special about Chesterton's belt.
Yeah, because I think they featured on the cover of the first Doctor Who annual, didn't they? If I remember rightly, didn't they put the Zarbi on there?
I think you are right. I think you are.
Yeah.
I can remember. Yeah. I think I would have been about 8 or 9, and I didn't. I even gave up on the target novel of this story. I think because it was about 300 pages long and very, very boring, and I was very, very 8. But even the no, that's not fair. The book did not do it for me. when I was a kid. I'll say that much.
When you consider a lot of people tend to say that because the Target novelisation was their first introduction to the story, they build up this image of what the show must have been like, and then obviously they get to see the transmitted TV version, and in a lot of cases they're going to be a bit disappointed. So if you're disappointed by the book in the first place, that's, there's only one way to go from there, isn't there, really?
Well, you would think, but I'm going to surprise you, because here we are at sort of 30 minutes, pretty much the halfway mark of the episode. I really loved this. I really loved it.
Explain why.
Explain why. Okay, it was, as I think everyone mentions and says in its defence, it was so hugely ambitious. It was this wonderful attempt to tell a very different story. Yeah. I thought it was quite sophisticated in the first kind of 2 or 3 episodes, where there were these reverses in the plot. So you start off thinking the Zarbi are bad, but then you think, oh no, it's the Menoptera because they're invading the Zarbi's planet, and then you find out that that's not the case and it's the other way round. And so there's a, for 1965 standards, a fairly sophisticated attempt at doing a bit of play there. Yeah. I thought episode 1 was really beautifully paced, in that I always love it when there's a little bit of kind of activity in the TARDIS near the start where nothing's really happening yet and people get to kick back and have character moments. Yeah. And I think Barbara, when she was administering Vicky's indeterminate medicament, we don't know whether it was a sedative or a blood thinner.
No, we know it was aspirin. It's fine.
But it came from the sedative drawer, so all's fair in love and war. And I wish I could remember now. There was a little. It was when Barbara makes a joke about if the pill doesn't work, I'll have to put on my makeup and do the dance and do the chanting as a kind of, aren't we primitive people? Just so ridiculously archaic in our medicine. I thought that was lovely. Now, the Doctor and Iain going out in their little white parkas with the little silver things on. Nice idea, poorly realised. It looked like the flight module that King of the Rocket Men.
Yeah, I liked how they colour coordinated his Astrakhan hat. So that it's all.
What was that about?
Yeah, it's strange, wasn't it? Yeah. It's almost like a precursor to the Mind Robber, where everything goes white.
Everything goes white, yeah. But I think the pacing up until the acid pool was kind of wonderful. Now we get to the acid pool, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to criticise Ian Chesterton at this point.
That's
now I know
this
this
may
come as a shock to everyone.
Okay.
Because I love him. I think he's really good.
Yeah, me too.
But so this is not, I think, too long after the Keys of Marinus, where they were by an ocean made of acid. And you'd think that would kind of put the willies up here a bit, but no, he's seen another indeterminate puddle of liquid on an alien world, and he's gone wading in, and he's like inches away from dipping his fingers in it. And I just didn't buy that bit. I thought anyone would have learnt that lesson from Marinus.
So here's a question, because it felt to me very much like the first couple of episodes were very science heavy, because I understand that there was like a teaching element here, and that's a part of classic Trek, particularly at this era. But we got the high pitched sonic frequencies that only Vicky could hear. We got the descriptions of the acid. We got there was a discussion about gold, I think. Did I just stop listening to them, or do they absolutely tail off as the plot ramps up?
I think you're right. I think the BBC had a very specific quota for the amount of education that had to be present in each story, and they try and sort of crowbar it into episode 1 and 2, so that then you can just run around for 4 episodes going, it's a giant ant thing. The chats, the plot, the kind of relaxed atmosphere kind of tails off, I think, pretty much by the end of part 2, and then it does become slightly more of a routine runaround. But the trick with the Vaseline, I watched it on my iPhone, as is rapidly becoming my catchphrase. When we make some t-shirts, mine's just going to say, I watched this on my iPhone yesterday. And I think it looked really good.
Yeah.
I think assuming in a sort of faintly patronising way that televisions in the 60s were just absolute rubbish, I think this would have looked slightly ethereal, slightly different, slightly haunting. And even if it didn't work, it came as close as, damn it, to looking like a really good idea. The next time I think anyone used Vaseline on a camera in science fiction was in Star Wars, when they made the wheels of the land speeder thing disappear. So, you know, if it wasn't for this, we wouldn't have Star Wars.
Exactly.
There, I've said it. I'm now climbing back in from the end of this branch.
Of all the things that I would care about, the world not having Star Wars is quite low on the list. Yeah, no, I take that point, and as I've said, there is lots to be admired about it. I found it slightly disconcerting when I couldn't see characters' faces, because there was smears of Vaseline on the lens. And I found that frustrating.
Yeah, I thought they did to my mind anyway, I thought they did a pretty decent job of creating an alien planet, albeit with the caveat that you mentioned before about the backcloth. It sold it to me. I suppose I'm looking at it from a 1960s TV point of view, rather than sort of analysing it in the harsh light of day in 2021
absolutely.
As we record this. But.
And I'd give them everything else they did. It is purely, I think, the Vaseline that frustrates me. But I see what they were aiming for. I think, I don't know whether they could have gone for a smaller quantity spread more evenly across the lens.
Maybe they went a bit crazy with it. But they did other things to try and do that sort of world building. So they had a choreographer called Rosalind de Winter come in, and she... It's something they mimicked again in the new series when it came back. So she was like a movement coach. So she tried to get the various factions to move in different ways. I mean, obviously the Zarbi didn't have an awful lot of room for manoeuvre, so to speak.
Well, they didn't have a leg to stand.
They really didn't.
Oh.
Hey!
It's getting a bit worse. The Slater people were presumably actually on all fours.
Yeah. And she also did speech coaching as well, so she was trying to get them to have differences between the species in order to sort of make them that little bit more realistic in a 1960s way. So they are trying.
Yeah, and I think it works. You say, I will happily buy into all of that. And I got the, if you're wearing gold, they can control you, and the relationship between the overarching spider thing,
the Animus,
there we go, between the Animus and the Zarbi, I was like, are you minions? Are you just a species that happens to have thrived better in the environment that the Animus is created? I think, if you call something the web planet, I expect to see more webs.
Yes, that was going to be one of my criticisms. There was, I think, an inadequate amount of web.
The web that was there was really good. So when the little tentacle thing comes out towards the end, and webs the Doctor and Vicky, I was quite impressed by that.
That was very good, wasn't it? And then when he's walking around in episode 6, and he's still got some sort of on his arm and his shoulder, it looked really good.
Yeah, and as a Star Trek fan, there are definitely. So the Animus, when it traps them in its tentacles, that is something that we've seen in Star Trek several times. There's a particularly good episode of Enterprise where various people get caught up in this kind of creature in the cargo bay, and it's almost exactly the same kind of thing that you get caught by a tentacle and you fight for as long as you can, and then you can't really fight anymore and you get trapped and kind of consumed. And it's just that the graphics are better in Enterprise, and that's okay. I was willing to look past that. But yeah, there are things oh, the light in here is so bright, and I'm but the lighting was literally brighter outside 2 minutes ago. And they're all walking into the room and being like, oh, I burn!
Can I hit you with a crazy fact?
Go for it.
The first episode of this story was the highest rated, in terms of viewing figures, Doctor Who story in the 1960s. It reached 13.5 million viewers.
Wow.
And it stayed around the 12.5 million mark pretty much all the way through. So obviously viewers in the 60s had a bit more stamina than we do.
Or just the less alternatives. I mean, if there's nothing else on, they probably only had like 2 channels or 3 channels, maybe. What story preceded this? Remind me.
It was the Romans.
So for 13 million people, presumably most of them would have been so impressed by the Romans that they told their friends, and thus the ratings went up dramatically for part 1 of this. That doesn't strike me as massively plausible.
I think I remember there was quite a big deal made of the Zarbi in the build-up to the first episode, so they were very much being vaunted as yet another successor to the Daleks as the next big thing.
Right.
Interestingly,
So,
I did the very, very small amount of research that I did do. I'm sure I read, is this not the first episode to have had a trailer?
Ooh.
Well, that would set the cat among the pigeons, wouldn't it? Or the Menoptera amongst the zombies.
Give me just 2 seconds. Yeah, it was also novel in terms of its advertising, since it was the first Doctor Who story to ever have a trailer, according to the Doctor Who Yearbook 1994. Apparently the director was irked by this, as he felt it gave away too much of the plot, as clips from later episodes were shown. Interesting.
Oh, that's interesting.
Now, I don't know where they trailed it, whether they trailed it like after the last episode of the Romans, or...
And of course, we're quite lucky in one respect, because we can watch this whole story in its entirety, whereas up until the end of the 1970s, this was missing, I believe, wiped and gone for good. But they found some film negative prints at BBC Enterprises in one of their random buildings in London, and then I think they recovered some more prints in Nigeria in the 80s, because I think the ones they had at BBC Enterprises had been edited, so they weren't the full episodes. So the ones they finally got back from Nigeria in the 80s, they were the complete story. So yeah, this one at one point was totally gone, and all you would have had would have been the soundtrack. So aren't you lucky, Lindsey, that we got to see the whole thing?
You know what, I'm really glad it exists, because I think, as we've said, it's a really important kind of benchmark in the evolution of Doctor Who. So while as a story it's perhaps not the most thrilling thing I've ever watched, and I'm not particularly inclined to sit through it again, they've obviously learned from it, and I hope that they didn't dismiss high concept altogether, because I think there was some scope there.
No, I think I don't want to get too spoilery, but yeah, it's not the end of that. But yeah, obviously, as you say, there were definitely lessons learned in terms of what can actually be achieved and what you can get away with.
And sometimes it's about how much effort and focus you're having to put on to delivering what it is you've set out to achieve. If everybody was so caught up in the seaweed and the stress and whatever may have been hidden in the seaweeds, that sometimes doesn't help, create an atmosphere where your actors are able to give a strong performance, or, you deal with some of the little technical things that could have perhaps been kind of negotiated more smoothly.
Well, also think of the intense pressure that specifically William Russell and Jacqueline Hill, and to a lesser extent Maureen O'Brien, would have been under if they were kind of conscious that they probably had to do this fairly seamlessly, because the guys in the suits were really suffering under all their fur or fiberglass and the hot studio lighting. And they've got to improvise when William Hartnell can't remember a word or a line or misses a cue. It must have been an absolutely fraught production.
I think I remember in some of the extra bits on the DVD, they were saying how fairly early on in the production they realised that these Derby costumes were really impractical for the guys to be standing around in when they were waiting for shots to be filmed. So they had to sort of improvise almost like a shooting stick affair where they could literally sit down because they were just standing in a sort of position where they were leaning forward with their backs arched the whole time. So it must have been absolute agony.
Yeah. It really must.
And that's it. I think it's sometimes really easy for us to forget the effort that clearly went into that.
Mm-hmm.
The people use the expression suffering for their art, but I think the guys playing the Zarbi and the Menoptera really suffered for their art. Even in terms of the Menoptera having to do that kind of silly speech pattern and all that weird arm dancing. They must have been so embarrassed, but yet they all went for it.
Absolutely,
Even Jarvis, who is not an actor I've ever warmed to, but even Jarvis managed to throw himself into it in a way that I just think, knowing what it must have been like to make this, I just think it was amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's it. You sometimes get quotes from actors who are like, it's ridiculous, if you stop and think about it too much, I'm paid to pretend to be somebody else. As soon as you start thinking about what it is your job actually is as an actor, you very quickly become disillusioned. But I think it's such a classic example of, and presumably quite early on in the you just have to go for it mentality, because I feel like being on stage would be a different experience from, if you know that 13 million people are going to tune in to watch this, and here you are in a fluffy suit that's got duct tape stripes on it, and and actually I shouldn't joke about the costuming, because actually I was so impressed by the quality of the costuming. The Zarbi, they look amazing.
Are we going to be seeing photos of you cosplaying in the near future as a Menoptera?
Well, you never know. I did threaten to go to a Star Trek convention as a tardigrade once.
Oh, wow.
I was going to make it out of a Stitch onesie, and I was going to have a giant sign that said, "We'll navigate for spores, brackets, or Prosecco." And I was just going to lie down and curl up on the floor with my giant sign. So yeah, if I was going to cosplay, it may well be something utterly ridiculous like that. But yeah, no, I genuinely, I was really, really impressed. I think particularly because when we watched the Aztecs, I was slightly flippant about the fact that it looked like they'd knocked on the BBC costume master's door and gone, "Can we have some Aztec costumes, please?" Because it felt very kind of here are the costumes from the high school drama department from when they did the Aztecs. Which, it was, and that's fine, but this felt like there had been a lot of love and effort put into it, and I can't, having not seen what happens either side, but it feels like quite a lot of budget went into this episode, or this serial.
It really does, doesn't it? And this is coming sort of towards the back end of a series that's already had, Daleks' Invasion of Earth, which was the big high-budget story, and I think we've had a couple of quieter Earth-based runarounds with, no alien menace at all, just to kind of balance the books. But this does feel like it would have, for the time, been a really kind of epic
Well, we had multiple
production.
different sort of characters in multiple different species. There's a lot of different kind of things going on here. And even in terms of sets, so even if you ignore the Vaseline, there was a clear kind of distinct outside set. There was interior caves, there was corridors, there was the Animus's space.
Yep, there was that weird sort of plastic tube that kept coming down very, very, very slowly. There was a no, but you're right. There were very clear and very well defined and very well realised sets as well. But again, probably wouldn't have taken much space because I imagine Richard Martin was a pretty canny director and good at getting the most out of a
the
small
outside
set. But yes, they spared no. I don't know the rest of that sentence. They
didn't take an easy way out.
They did a really good job.
No.
That'll do. That's
so other than at the start where it felt like they were walking in circles, because it did feel like they were walking in circles.
Yeah, that was a little bit. Yeah,
I do wonder whether possibly Lindsey's experience may have been slightly easier if we'd perhaps given you a little bit more time to watch this, and maybe you could watch it a bit more episodically rather than having to sort of binge it in a relatively short space of time. Whether you might have had a slightly more favourable experience.
That was quite mean of us.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Are we the baddies?
You are the
That's...
something. No, and I think...
Oh, that's another Webb reference there. Mitchell and Webb. Hey.
You are the something. I think also I did, like, at various points I did sit there and go, I really need to watch another 2 episodes of this. So I wasn't perhaps in the right frame of mind. But yeah, no, like, despite my general frustration with the story, I think it probably has more going for it than the Aztecs did. Just in terms of, you know, what it was aiming for and, you know, the quality of the workmanship that has clearly gone into it. Yeah.
It's the difference between... So with the Aztecs, they knew exactly what was required of them. They knew how to do it. It was what they were good at. It was like making a very solid acoustic album of your greatest hits and some notable B-sides. Whereas this one is like making a really insanely overproduced, ambitious album, maybe a double album, kind of going for a Pink Floyd vibe, maybe. You know, it's just a very different
concept
beast.
album.
And yeah, lovely. Yeah, and I think they got it. I think it maybe doesn't age well in terms of the better our television sets become and the more jaded and listless we become as humans. And maybe it doesn't hang together quite so well, but I think judge it on the merits of its day, and yeah, you can really see why suddenly this was the most watched, therefore perhaps the most popular story that had happened.
I think there's
point.
a really interesting conversation to be had on a bigger level or on a bigger scale about the things that we admire and the things that we enjoy, and that those are not always the same things.
Yeah. No.
Oh, that's an excellent conversation. We could do that as a bonus episode.
We touched on this. We were recording about Lower Decks, which is a new animated series of Star Trek, and that difference between, like, do I think it's earth-shattering? Do I think it has changed the world? Absolutely not. But do I enjoy watching it? Is it something that I will watch regularly because it's easy? Absolutely. And I think we're really prone to using words like just when we talk about things like that. Well, it's just a cartoon, or it's just light relief, or it's just, you know, there are episodes of Doctor Who that are frivolous and light-hearted, but that doesn't make them any less valuable. They're just valuable in a different way. So while this is not an episode that I would watch again from a plot perspective, perhaps, I'm really glad it exists, and I'm really glad that I've seen it.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad it wasn't a complete torture.
I don't know that I would have said that an hour ago, but I appear to have talked myself round.
I feel like Ian's talked you round.
It goes one of two ways when you start dissecting something. You're either like, oh, this is actually not nearly as good as I thought it was, and there's all these problems with it, and it just doesn't make any sense, and that can be quite disheartening. And particularly when you then start watching something and seeing that as you're watching it the first time. Or actually you realise that for all its failings, there's quite a lot to like about it, and it's maybe not, you know, the complete disaster that you might have originally written it off as. So, unless you've got anything else you'd like to say about this story, shall we wrap it up and give it a score? I think we've probably covered all the major points. Ian, I'm going to come to you first. What would you like to award this story?
I am going to incite rage and apoplexy in pretty much everyone listening to this story. I'm going to give this a 10. Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Because of what it was, it was reaching for the stars, and I know it's a science fiction show and that's kind of the job, but in a series, or a season rather, that's seen a lot of very kind of quiet, low-key, pedestrian, Earth-based stories. And I say that, it's probably only the Romans, but that's the one that sticks out as being the antithesis of this. I think this has so much heart, and everyone was working so hard and trying so hard, and it must have been an unbearable production, and it was amazing, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, it's a 10 from me.
Wow, is that your first ever 10?
It might be.
Wowzers. Well, follow that, Lindsay.
No
pressure.
I was about to say, I can't even remember what I scored the Aztecs now, I think. Because I struggle to compare, classic Who with contemporary. I think I'm going to go with like a 7. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so. I think
respectable.
Like, we're taking off 3 points because the plot is slightly unbearable. But yeah, no, I think I'm really glad to have watched it, actually, and I'm really glad it exists. I'm glad it was found.
Excellent. I am gonna kind of fall somewhere between the pair of you. I'm gonna go for an 8, and I think my reasoning is that, as you both said, there are issues, shall we say, production-wise, that you can't really escape. But for all that, there's a lot of ambition. They were really trying to just give the viewers something really unique and new and different and otherworldly, and I think on a lot of levels they succeeded. So yeah, I'm going to go for an 8.
Yay!
Which has quite surprised me, because I didn't expect it to be a particularly high scoring episode, so I'm quite chuffed with that.
Well, that's the great thing about this show. It's totally unpredictable and often quite silly.
You're not wrong.
But that spider really did have a very sexy voice.
Was it a spider, though? Was it really?
Who cares with a voice like that?
Well, on that note, that's enough about what we think about this story. Let's go to some listener feedback.
I've got mail.
So let's hear what you guys have to say about this story. First from me is Andy Moore, our friend on Twitter at AMMoore67. Andy says, fucking bonkers, but commendably ambitious, and extra points for having Martin Jarvis in it. Ooh, I feel like there might be a bit of a debate there between you guys. Another from the read and reread the book pile. I suspect for a lot of people the difference between the book and what they finally saw contributed to a fair bit of its poor reputation. Yeah, I think we were touching on that earlier. Thank you, Andy. Next up we have the Crinoid podcast, which is our friend Jim. And Jim says, one of the first Hartnell stories I ever saw, and I thought they were probably all like that. They really aren't. Hugely ambitious, enticingly creepy, and endearingly creaky. Its reach exceeds its grasp at times, but it's a great story with an epic scope. Excellent, thank you, Jim. And we have some feedback from RetroTube Archive TV podcast. And they are at retro_tube on Twitter. And they say, I haven't watched it in many, many years, but I seem to remember it's silly fun. Certainly not as terrible as its reputation was at that time. Thank you for that. And we've heard from Philip Edney from the Sirens of Audio podcast. Hello, Philip. He says, amazingly ambitious and thoughtful, the best created world and political system to this point. Costumes are amazing, though slightly impractical. The main cast do a great job acting against props. The alien communication does get painful. For all the effort, it doesn't quite work. No, I think that's, pretty fair. Next up, we have our dear friend Ham-Fisted Bap Vendor, at Bap Vendor on Twitter, and they say, the craggy, otherworldly landscape of Vortis, etched deep after multiple readings of Strutton's novel. At times, the TV production still captures the magic of those early readings, thanks to John Wood's design work and Les Structures Sonores, the epitome of mid-60s Doctor Who. Yeah, Les Structures Sonores, they were they provided the music for this episode. I think it was actually stock music. I don't think it was actually made specifically for this story. But yeah, it gives it an otherworldly dimension. Thank you for that.
Sorry, I was just going to say the audio production in general was quite remarkable. Like, there was obviously a lot of work put into something that they could just about afford, like echoes.
Yeah, definitely.
Echo!
Echo.
Echo!
Echo.
And we have heard from...
Echo.
We've heard from Cliff Chapman, at Cliff Chapman on Twitter. And they say, underrated and really rather good. With a slightly tighter edit and a new score, people would love it, I think. Richard Martin's music choices are always a big letdown in his episodes, and the climax lacks drama because of it. But it's much more interesting and well done than its reputation. Thank you, Cliff. And we've had some audio feedback from our friend Ben Schneider down in Indiana. So let's go to Ben and hear what he's got to say about the Web Planet.
Iain and Mark, how are you? Okay, the Web Planet, I think, suffers from the Space Museum syndrome. You know, where the first episode is really innovative and cool and spooky, but then the subsequent episodes really sort of drag it down a bit, and I think that the Zarbi represent the... Sorry, guys, there's something buzzing around my head. It's making it hard to concentrate. Anyway, I think that the Menoptera are really show that... Man, he's getting close. Oh, come on, man. Come on, leave me alone. I'm trying to talk to Iain and Mark. Come on. Ow. All right, fine. You want to fight? Fine. You want to fight? Oh, jeez. Ooh, right in the animus.
Thank you, Ben. And Ian, who have you heard from?
Oh, I always enjoy Ben's bits. They're the
great.
best
Yeah,
bit, really, aren't they?
Yeah. We'll just...
I only really stick around to
We'll release a...
I could have been in bed.
We should do an episode with just all of his stuff all edited together. That'd be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we could do that, couldn't we? Yeah. Who have we heard from? You've sent me basically a small ebook of more feedback.
Yeah.
So I'll go through it as gracefully and rapidly as I can. The fabulous, the wonderful David Kitchen.
Hey, David.
At David_Kitchen, says, the first half is pretty amazing as the TARDIS crew explore a genuinely alien world. Some good Hartnell moments, but it does really start to slow down in the second half, and the climax is pretty dull. Can't really argue with that. Kevin Jordan, who, let me start again, the glorious, the majestic Kevin Jordan, at Livewire 1221 on the Twitters, says, I really like it, especially for the effort made to depict a truly alien world. He's absolutely right.
He is
10
bang on.
out of 10. What's next? Here we go. Oh, Dwayne Bunny, the erudite, the rugged, the manly Dwayne Bunny.
Hi, Dwayne.
Says, hi Dwayne. I first saw this on 10th generation VHS in the early 90s, and it was magical.
Oh.
It must have looked like they just put Vaseline all over it. Anyway,
imagine his surprise when
it's
he saw
an
the
incredibly. Oh, there's people in it. It's an incredibly ambitious story. That is, until the budget ran out just before the creation of the Optera costumes. Now, that is a good point that we perhaps skirted over quite quickly. But yes, of the three alien races on offer, they were by far the most shite.
Oh, these are cockroach people.
They're the kind of grubby
the ones
guys.
who speak like Papa Lazaro.
Hello, Dave.
Yes, they were perhaps not as good as either the ant people or the butterfly wasps.
You're my wasp now, Dave.
Actually, that bit, the scene at the end when the TARDIS crew are basically saying goodbye and leaving, and the three of them just have to go off in the background and jump up and down and play with each other. Yeah. Oh, they must have been crying on the inside and thinking, we're getting 3 and 6 for this. It's all worth it.
I was at the RSC last week, darling.
Yes.
It's the
I
fact
gave
that the
my
costumes
Hamlet.
that they clearly were sort of hopping and bouncing around.
Last week I played the Dane, whether 'tis nobler in the mind. Anyway.
I would love
Colonel
to see whether
Barker.
there was some outtakes of them doing different accents.
I would like to think they did a French accent at one point. That would have been good.
Yes.
Good morning. I was crawling through the jaws when Anyway, moving swiftly on. Aaron J. Klimas, I'm not sure. He's lovely either way. At Colonel Barker. I first saw it on UK TV in 1997 or 8 on All Star. Sorry, I've not heard of that. There was an advertisement for a thing called The Who Files, and I turned it on, and it was Web Planet 3. I was so happy to finally see it. It was so unclear what it was or what episodes would be screened, so I kept recording them at 11 p.m. at night to try and fill in the gaps in my collection. They did actually advertise airing 10th Planet 1 to 4 at one point.
Wow.
I think from memory, they aired episodes 1 to 3, followed by Resistance is Useless in the final spot. I almost exploded.
I can imagine.
Well, I mean, you would. Andy, who is at Zodin's brother, on the Twitters, describes the story as a great cure for insomnia. Now, I'll take issue with that because I've been up since 4 o'clock this morning
Watching
with really
this?
bad insomnia. And I listened to 2 snooker podcasts.
Holy
That's how
moly, and
desperate
you still
I was
didn't
to fall asleep. And I still didn't fall asleep. I don't think this would have got me to sleep at all.
Wow.
I think this was... yeah.
The Zarbi noises alone would have woken you up.
That's all in my bulging sack this time, fella.
You paint images with words, don't you? So, Lindsey, who have you heard from?
So I have also got a collection of feedback from, I'm sure, certainly delightful people, although I'm not sure I can laud them quite so effectively as the lovely Iain has. So we've got Ben Scott on Facebook. The Web Planet was the first ever Hartnell DVD I owned. Also the first full serial of I watched of his. My thoughts on it were, this Hartnell serial had the highest ratings out of his tenure. It was very creative for a 1960s budget, smudged lens cameras for a special effect, and the music score by Fresh band Les Structures Sonores. Very first producer Verity Lambert stated in her own words that they were going to score the Doctor Who theme, but weren't available at the time. My thought on this serial, imagine Christopher Nolan doing a pantomime.
Wow. That is brilliant.
Oh dear.
Excellent.
So next up I've got Gavi Lad, also from Facebook. Love it. Episode 2 is slow as a wet week, however the story is good overall, and is the first occasion the Doctor offers a confectionery item from his pocket to his companion, in this case chocolate to Vicky. I'm afraid that must have been while I was not paying as much attention as I perhaps should have been. So we've got Hayden Gribble from Twitter.
Hi, Hayden.
So the book is tremendous. Why they ever put it to telly, I will never know. What, you mean the TV series came? Oh, well, they could have cleaned the lens before they started filming. Oh, that was on purpose. Yes. It's nice, the Web Planet. And next up we have got Stephen B, also on Twitter, at Steed Stylen. Forever a favourite, thanks almost entirely to Doctor Who and the Zarbi, an ancient tome that found me amid the dusty shelves of a school library, and which smelled of stardust and space adventures. Those illustrations! The concept of the carcinomic animus still terrifies me. And he's given us like a little ant and a little bee emoji.
Aww.
It's very nicely put, Stephen.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, thank you.
And I have also got, last but not least, Tony Cross at Lockstar71 on Twitter. It is one of my favourite Doctor Who stories. Yes, it is a bit long. Yes, it has an ambition way beyond its budget, but I love that it is an attempt to convey an alien civilization, not just through design, but through language too.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for your feedback. It's really great to hear from you guys, and especially nice to hear new names being mentioned as well. So thank you for all your feedback. We'll be listing all the various ways you can get in touch if you want to send in your thoughts about a future story that we'll be covering. So it just leaves us to thank Lindsey so much for coming back on again. Thank you, Lindsey.
Not at all. As I've said, thank you for having me. Always a delight, gentlemen.
Oh, we love having you on. Would you like to give a little plug to what you've got going on at the moment before you disappear?
Oh, why not? So the best place to find me is usually on Twitter. You can find me at LHA_again. And I am a regular host on Star Trek podcast, Trek This Out. And you can find us on all good podcatchers. And you can also find us on Twitter at Trek This Out Pod.
It is a fantastic show. Well worth a listen.
Thank you.
So, until next time, where we'll be going on a crusade. If you'd like to get in touch, you can email us at mailbagofrassilon@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter @TimeEndSpacePod, and you can also find us on Facebook. If you want to leave some audio feedback, there is a link in the show notes. You can use your phone or your computer and leave up to 60 seconds of feedback, or if you're listening via the Anchor website, you can click on the message button and leave your audio. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you to Momo Tempo for providing our theme music.